I'm Amanda, and this is Not Your Granny's Quilt Show. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. I am so glad you're here. I have Nicholas Ball. I am just so excited. I have been aware of him and followed him for a while. And if you listen to my episode with Rachel from Crafty Monkies, she talked about him as well. He is just an amazing improv quilter. He's got books about it. And on top of that, he's a Bernina UK Ambassador. He's an Aurifilosopher and Aurifil designer. And still teaches with Crafty Monkies. So if you are so inclined to sign up for classes, you can learn from Nicholas as well. So I just loved our conversation. It was so fun to get to know him and learn about his background, coming from photography to then, getting into quilting and the improv space. And it was just such a lovely conversation. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear from Nicholas. And so let's get into it. Hi, Nicholas. How are you?
Hey, Amanda, how are you? I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you're here.
Having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I had followed you beforehand, but then when Rachel and I were trading interviews from Crafty Monkies this last summer, she was like, you need to talk to Nicholas. You need to talk to Nicholas. And I know DMs can be a disaster. And I think I had DM'd you and it was like months. And then I was like, well, I'll just email him. And then it was so funny because like I emailed you and then literally like the next day you messaged me on Instagram and you're like, I'm so sorry, I didn't see this. And I was like, oh.
I go through this phase of kind of like checking message requests because I get so many DMs. So there's like a whole bunch. And most of the time they're like spam or somebody's tagged you in something like a giveaway prize or something. And then I saw your message and I was like, how could I miss this? So yeah, it was I had to respond straight away.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for responding. I'm so glad you're here. And like I was telling you before, I've just heard so many lovely things about you, but we've never chatted really. So I am so excited to get to know you. And that means, just like with all my guests, we start at the beginning in how you even got into the quilting world in the first place.
Yes. So I have always been a sort of crafty person. It wasn't my intention to be a quilter. I never imagined for 1 second that, this is where I would be when I was a little bit younger. So my grandmother taught me a lot of sort of handcraft. So she wasn't a quilter, but she taught me things like knitting. We would do counted cross-stitch kits together, hand embroidery. She was the person that actually taught me how to thread a needle for the very first time. So I've always had this love of sort of craft and wanting to make and create sort of from a very young age. And I actually went to art school and studied photography. That was what I wanted to do. That was my career of choice. I had sort of visions of traveling the world and shooting the cover of fashion magazines and things. So after graduating art school with my degree in photography, I did a little bit of traveling. And I ended up in Paris, and the intention was to pursue that photography career. But in Paris, there are lots of distractions, good food, good wine. I was working in an Irish bar as well, so lots of friends were made. And I came back to the UK after about 2 years in France, a little bit disillusioned that the photography hadn't taken off. So at that point, I decided that I wanted something creative that was so far removed from photography, just to sort of fuel my creativity, give me a little bit of break from the disappointment that photography had been at that point. So I bought a very cheap sewing machine, some very questionable fabrics and threads, and took a book out of the library that was a sort of beginner's patchwork and quilting book, and just began following it step by step to make a half square triangle quilt. That was my very first foray into quilting. And I loved it so much, the whole process of it, that I didn't even finish that quilt top. I was so eager to move on to the next thing that I kind of just left the quilt top on the side and worked on the next thing and then the next thing. So yeah, that was kind of where the quilting bug bit, really. And as I said, it wasn't my intention, but it has kind of taken over my life in a sense. It has become my job, and I wake up thinking about quilting, and I go to bed thinking about quilting. So it is very much an integral part of my life now, in the way that I first thought photography would be. So it's kind of diverted my path a little bit, but yeah, I love it.
Yeah, that's incredible. And kudos to grandmas who have the patience to teach their
Right.
grandkids. Because I think sometimes, it does seem to skip a generation a little bit. Like, a lot of times it is like the parent, the mom, or whatever that passes it on. But so many people learn from their grandmother. And like,
Yeah.
I started to get into crafty things, or, at least sewing. And my mom sewed, but my grandma also would sit down and work with me, and she taught me to crochet and all those things. So it's just, it's nice to have that influence. And I think grandmas sometimes can have more patience too than moms. They're like, I'm busy. I'm raising this kid. I'm taking care of the house. I'm cooking. And grandmas are like, you can come over here and hang out.
Yeah. So I have a younger brother, and we're very much chalk and cheese, and my mum and my dad are very much chalk and cheese. So I follow my dad in the sense of this creativity and wanting to make, he worked a lot with wood when I was growing up. So he would kind of give me the offcuts, and I would kind of glue them together with wood glue and things. Whereas my mum has sort of no creative spark at all. She's never been interested in that creative side. She is very much into sort of sports and things. So my brother naturally followed her with his love of football, whereas I was more like my dad. And I think my grandmother saw that in me. And I was one of 5 grandchildren, and I was the only one really, I think, that sort of showed an interest in the things that she found, relaxing or used as hobbies, like the hand sewing and the embroidery. So it is lovely, as you said, to have somebody that is willing and able to sort of sit you down and show you something, particularly if you express an interest in wanting to learn that thing. I wasn't just doing it because I was there and I was bored. I genuinely wanted to kind of do the things that she was doing. So it was great to have that sort of guide from an early age to kind of help me build a foundation, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And lucky to have that, because I think sometimes people go their whole lives until they're adults and then find quilting or find some kind of crafty hobby. So to have grown up with it feels like a blessing
Absolutely
among all of it, because you have a built-in kind of stress reliever and way to express yourself and kind of work through things. So that's incredible. I want to go back to talk about photography, because I was a teacher, and the switching careers, dropping that to run a quilting business and do the podcast full time was such an identity crisis for me. And so I'm wondering how that was for you. Like you said, disappointment and kind of disillusioned, but can you talk more about that time?
Definitely. There was a disappointment. I kind of looked back at the 3 years that I'd spent in art school, learning photography, and without any sense of ego, I was good. I graduated with the first class honors. So I kind of
congratulations.
Really thank you. I really thought that would be my, career path. There was never any alternative. So, growing up, you do the usual things of, I wanted to be a vet, and then I wanted to be a special effects and makeup artist because I'm really into gore and horror and all of that stuff. It was only when I got sort of towards doing my sort of GCSEs in the UK and then further A levels, where you start to think about whether you're going to go to university or art school or do an apprenticeship or whatever it might be, that I really started to consider photography as a career, because up to that point, I'd done it as a GCSE and then an A level. So the natural next step was to go and do it at a degree level. So that was my intent. It was a very clear goal. I was very determined, studied hard and all of that sort of stuff. And I think when I got to Paris, there was just so much distraction. As I said, you're in a completely new country. It's that excitement of living away from home, not just living away from home, but living in a completely different country or place, new friends, new connections, particularly working in that Irish bar. There's so many nationalities coming in. You've got, people who are coming in for rugby, you've got French people, you've got locals, you've got people on holiday. So all this sort of mix match of cultures and things kind of just was, a big distraction. And before you know it, as you know, time flies and you realize I haven't actually done anything. I haven't done all of the things that I came here to do. I had some connections that I wanted to make. I had some sort of avenues that potentially could be followed or in pursuit of that photography career. So disappointing, I think, was what it was when I came back and realized, was that 3-year art degree a waste of time? But I think, kind of life gives you forks in the road, and you just have to make the best of those opportunities. People often ask me, why quilting? I said to you, I wanted something removed, as far removed from photography as possible. And
Yeah.
the campus where I did my degree, we shared a building with the textile department. So maybe subconsciously walking to lectures, being in and around that space, seeing things like, fabric manipulation, weaving, dyeing, all of these textile processes, maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, a little seed was planted. Who knows? I also think as well, because growing up, I watched a lot of sort of American TV shows and films and still do. And once you notice a quilt in the set, you always see them. They're always on the picture on the wall, or, that you can always spot these little strategically placed set dressings, which I kind of, again, think was embedded in my mind. And then like that with the love of handcraft that my grandmother gave me. So it was a challenge, definitely, to move away from photography. But I think trusting the process and then kind of realizing, well, actually, I quite like this first and foremost. You have to enjoy it. And then to get to a point where people were like, well, could you teach me that? Or how did you make that? Or, how do you do this? Where people started to show a genuine interest and wanted to kind of know a bit more about my style of quilting, kind of solidified that choice then. And then all sense of disappointment was kind of gone. It was much about looking forward. But yeah, like you said, it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to take that leap away from something which you were so sure of in the first place and have it turn out completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know how it is in the UK, because I definitely know like American culture is intense. And there's a very big push and drive to choose what you're going to do with your life from a very young age. And so we don't really have, like, there are programs in like high school, the end of whatever grades, like 10 through 12, to do, you can do more specialized classes. And there are certain like dual enrollment programs where you'll get credits from a university while you're taking classes in your high school. And you can do those kinds of things, but it's not as focused and driven, I think, as other countries in that way. But also just how expensive university is, and how much, just not even just the time, because it's a lot of time no matter what. But I think the amount of money that gets spent holds a whole different level of guilt too. Because there's no such thing as free education here unless it's a public school. Public, like K-12 education. It's not, there's nothing, anyway. So I think definitely for me, it was kind of the thought of like, I'm letting this career go that I spent a gazillion dollars on getting, and I got a master's degree and I did the thing, but it was sucking the life out of me. And I was like, it ended up not being, what I wanted. And so, my gosh, so sorry. It's so annoying.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. It's fine.
I'm like looking for anything. I'm like, what is it? What do I need?
It's awful when you have like a throat thing going on and then you have to speak. I did a talk a few weeks ago, and I could feel my voice going. It wasn't nerves or anything. I never get nervous. It was obviously something. Yeah. And I was trying to like power through, and I feel like everyone was looking at me because my voice was going, and then I was like, stop it. And it's just, it's really bad when you need to speak, but your voice is not operating.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, go back to my choir and singing training. Like, how do I use my voice without straining my vocal cords and making it worse? So anyway, okay, I think I'm good now. But anyway, so yeah, I can definitely relate to that kind of disappointed feeling of like, what did I just do? What did I just spend all my time on? But when you find the thing that does speak to your soul and does keep inspiring you every day, it kind of feels like, oh, okay, it's okay. It helps the guilt and the disappointment subside, I think. So I'm glad you found quilting. And so you said you started with half square triangles, which I think is kind of where everybody starts, right? Unless they're super ambitious and try something else that's harder. But I definitely made a lot of half square triangle quilts in my early days.
Definitely. I think it's like a rite of passage, kind of, I am an ambitious person, but I think at that point, when you're trying something new, you kind of want to do it by the book.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that I was reading, the books from the library and the online tutorials and stuff, they all kind of, it was either a 4-patch or a half square triangle to kind of like cut your teeth and get you a firm foundation. So yeah, just a half square triangle quilt. The fabric was awful. I think the seam allowance was like 1/2 inch, maybe more at points, and thread was like fishing wire. It was just bad. It was all bad. But on the flip side, it was good because it kind of instilled that love in me. And as I said, I didn't finish that quilt because I was so eager to learn. Okay, what's next? I've done half square triangles. What's a log cabin? What's a drunkard's path? What's a 9-patch? All of these words, this whole new vocabulary, which I'd never heard up until that point, was just kind of like so intriguing to me. So I wanted to just go through as many of the processes and techniques, I guess, as I could in those early, years to try and get a firm foundation in the craft.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are so many things to do, and it can be overwhelming to pick a lane or just even decide what you want to start with or try next. And it's so fun to see kind of, at least for me, I love looking back at my old quilts and seeing the progression of like
Definitely.
when all I was doing was half square triangle quilts. Cause I'm like, okay, what can I do next with half square triangles? Like it's an easy thing I could put together a half square triangle, but like what designs can I make next? And then finally graduating to different things and having a business, I think forces you to push your boundaries a little bit too, like as you're kind of figuring out your path and what you're going to do with it and where you're not necessarily comfort, but just like, I guess it's a comfort in a way that it, something that really speaks to you, that really feels natural in terms of what you're looking at, what you want to design, what what shapes and designs you want to make. So
yeah.
So when did you start pulling improv into all of it?
So I'd been quilting. So we're talking, this foray into quilting would have been about 2012, something like that. So I'd been quilting for about 2 years. And, don't get me wrong, I loved it. I loved quilting. I loved the process, but I wasn't really sort of in love with the things that I was making because, they were from patterns. So other than the fabric choice, they looked exactly like they were supposed to, and when you compared it to the pattern booklet or the cover photograph or whatever, it looked like that. And, if 10 people made that quilt, they would all look the same other than fabric. So whilst I loved the process and the techniques, it was the end products. I kind of look at them and be like, nah, and, kind of just move on. I wasn't relishing that moment of completion and being like, oh, I love this, this thing that I've made. So the improv story, and some of your listeners may already know this story, but it involves vegetables, which is a very strange thing to be talking about in a quilting interview. But I was in work one day just flicking through, a supplement that came with the newspaper that day, and there's recipes and blah blah blah, and there was this recipe for a leek tart, which I stopped and read because I love leek tarts, and leeks are very popular in Wales. Didn't know if you know that, but so I was kind of reading this recipe, and there was a picture, obviously, of the finished tart, and then there was a picture of a leek that had been kind of cut through. So you could see all of the sort of lines and concentric circles within it. And there was just something about that picture that was really captivating. And it's totally random. I don't know where it came from, but all I could think of at that time was, I really want to make that in fabric. So I ran home and I just pulled all of the scraps that I could find in colors that I thought would work. And it's worth mentioning that at that point, my scraps were just very, very tiny amount, nothing like the sort of mass of scraps that they are now. So pulled what I could, never heard the word improv, knew that there wasn't going to be a pattern, couldn't Google it and say, how to make a leek patchwork block, or if there was such a thing, it was going to be paper piece maybe or applique. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I just kind of spent a good few hours just piecing things together. And at the end of it, came out with this leek block that was very much the beginning, my foray into improv quilting. And I was looking at it, I thought that was amazing because, if I do that again, it's going to be different. It might have similarities. There might be things in common, similar colors or whatever, similar lines and shapes, but it's not going to be identical. Yeah. And that kind of just lit a spark in me. And it was from that point then where I began sort of exploring improv in much more detail, became a little bit obsessed with vegetables and cutting them open and seeing what was inside. And after that leak block followed several others, which then turned into a quilt called Vegetable Patch. Very original, I thought, on my part, Vegetable Patch 1 or something like that. And that was that was the first time I kind of made something that wasn't a pattern. That wasn't a set of specific step-by-step instructions, that didn't tell me cut a 2.5-inch square. It was all very free and organic, and I just loved it. So from that point forward, I was obsessed with trying to make quilts that would be truly unique, that could never be replicated. Even if I remade them, they would be different. So vegetables, flowers, wildlife, birds, feathers, all of this sort of stuff. I began looking around me and being inspired by what you might think is strange sources of inspiration for a quilt maker, but really work and lend themselves to that improv way of piecing. And that would have been, about 2014. And around that time, I went on a quilting retreat. The first time I'd ever been on something like that. I was a little bit nervous, I was getting to meet some people I'd been following on Instagram in real life and just spend a weekend with like-minded people. And there was a show and tell. So, I kind of bravely stood up and I held up the Vegetable Patch quilt. And I remember saying that this is the quilt that made me realize the quilter that I want to be when I grow up. So it was definitely a special quilt, and I still have it, and it's in the book, and it comes with me everywhere. Whenever I do my talks and things, if it's my sort of inspiring improv talk, which I deliver, then that is the quilt that starts the whole story. It's very special to me because if it wasn't for that quilt, then I wouldn't be sat here chatting to you. So improv has definitely changed my approach to quilting, as well as given me so many opportunities to connect with people and inspire them and instill that love of more liberated sewing in them. And they might be from a similar point that I was, from a very traditional standpoint, thinking, oh no, I could never do improv. My brain doesn't work like that, or I need the rigidity of the instructions or whatever. So it's nice just to sort of show people, look, I did it with this quilt, and you can too. So that's always fun.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. And I think that's the lovely thing about having a creative brain, is that you can find inspiration where you wouldn't expect it. A leak, right?
Yeah.
I love
right.
leaks
It's
too,
bizarre,
so,
isn't it? It's
yeah.
so strange. It is
Right.
weird. Yeah.
But I love that.
I love that you can I always encourage people, so often now we're kind of on a screen, we're looking down, we've got like blinkers on, we don't see all of these things. And there's nothing wrong with following a pattern. If that's your job, that's good. There are so many different avenues to quilting. But if you kind of take the blinkers off and you look at that tree that you walk past every day, or you see that, that feather that fell off of that bird, or whatever, or that shell that you found at the beach.
Yeah.
Improv piecing then gives you the tools and the techniques to make that thing that you've inspired by in a completely unique to you way. So it does open up a whole world of creativity and allows for sort of bizarre sources of inspiration, but those sources of inspiration kind of result in just amazing stuff that's really unique to you. And challenging, it's a creative challenge as well, improv, definitely. So I love it. Definitely love it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm not so brave that I've tried a ton of improv, but the times that I have, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm fine. It's okay. I can do it. I think it does take a little bit of bravery and just willingness to mess up and try again and just kind of problem solve in the moment. And it does take a lot of different brain processes, but I think it's good. It helps you think and helps you push your brain and push your thinking and push your boundaries of what you think is possible. I think before I learned foundation paper piecing, I was like seeing people's designs. I'm like, that looks so hard. There's no way. And then I just finally tried it one day. I was like, just get over yourself, grab some scraps and figure it out, So I finally did. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like, okay, it's not that bad, and
Yeah.
now I've done it a ton. And so I think it's the same with improv. I think the more I tried it, if I tried it more, I think I'd probably be fine, but it just takes a whole different set of brain skills than just following a pattern and,
Yeah,
doing step by
it
step.
does. It's definitely a mindset as well, I think. We give ourselves mental, blocks. We put up walls in our mind to say that we can't do this. And it's, I'm not just talking in our creative lives, in our day-to-day lives as well. We're always kind of saying, I can't do it, or I'll do it tomorrow, or, I'll think about it. And, it's nobody, I always say to my students whenever I'm teaching that nobody says that improv has to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to say goodbye traditional piecing forever.
Right.
You can kind of flip between the two. And you put it really brilliantly. It does use a different part of your brain. So if one day you wake up and you think, I want to be really challenged, but I don't want to have to do any maths or kind of pay attention, then you can go to improv. And then on the flip side of that, when you want to do, really precise piecing, or you want the maths and you want the sort of specific step by step, then you can go back to traditional piecing. So they can work together hand in hand, and sort of you can approach them and use them as and when you need, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just always looking for ways to expand your skill base also helps, because I think, we can get into a comfort zone and in a rut of like, well, this is just what I do. This is how I engage with this. And for some people, they've tried everything, found the one thing they like, and then they stick with that. And it's great. It's like, yeah, go for it. But I think if it's a fear choice because you're scared of trying other things or scared to mess up if you try something else, that's a different story. So I think trying different skills, learning different techniques, learning different processes in the quilting sphere, there's tons and tons of ways to engage with quilting, just gives you a better chance of, one, learning more about the craft and expanding your brain to give you more ideas and be more inspiring. And if it's a complete failure, well, at least you tried. I think there's so many positives to it, to trying something new. And like you're saying with improv, you can see something that might seem mundane to somebody else, but the way the leek grows with its layers and all the shapes within it is a different perspective than just looking at it from the outside. Like, okay, it's white on the bottom, a little bit green at the top. It's a tall, lean stalk, but when you open it up, there's a whole new world inside. And it reminds me of when I was in college doing my education degree, we had to take towards the end, you take like your, art for education and social studies for education. They're like geared towards the classroom. And so the art class I took was from my most favorite person, Linda Boo. And she was the art teacher at the school that I ended up teaching at. And anyway, so we were doing a printmaking unit, and she had vegetables laid out. And I was like, what the heck? She's like, well, if you just chop the base of the bundle of celery off, you can put that in paint, dip it, and it looks like a rose. And I was like, what? So we're like using other things. And it changed my world, because I just never even really thought of that. I knew people would carve things out of like potatoes, but you have to take this like unassuming lump of starch and turn it into something. But, just that some vegetables had these different things, different perspectives, different uses. So anyway, it's just interesting how, something like that can just completely change your perspective and give you a new view on yourself, even because before you were just piecing, following traditional patterns and making things that everybody else makes, which is fine. Totally fine. We're not saying anything bad about it. So don't get your panties in a bunch. But I think that like whole new world inside your brain that like cracks open and finally has some light on it. And you're like, wait a second, what is this?
What it is. It's a light bulb moment. Definitely.
Yeah. That's so fun. So how long were you, kind of messing around with improv and all that before you got into thinking about your book?
So the leek quilt, or the vegetable quilt, would have been about 2014. And my first book, Inspiring Improv, was published in 2019. Okay. So we're talking about a good 5 years. Obviously, I would have sort of started working on it, I think, in around 2017. So I had a few more years to kind of sort of play and experiment, because you're always learning, right? Even now, what are we, 2025? So
Yeah.
it's even over 10 years ago now since the vegetable quilt. And I'm still learning. I'm still looking for challenges. But it was nice to kind of get what I call like my core piecing techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just to reiterate, like when I made the vegetable quilt, I didn't know what this was. I hadn't been exposed to improv or the word improvisation, in the context of like sewing and things. So it was very much learning on the job. So it kind of began with, like what I call slabs. So just sewing bits of fabric together, and then, freehand curves. Or what happens if I cut this without a ruler? We're always taught ruler, rotary cutter. What happens if we don't? What happens if I sew this together and then cut it in half and then sew it back together again? So I was kind of like building a foundation of what I call core piecing techniques. And it was around that time where I began, somebody had asked me in a local sewing shop to run a beginner's patchwork and quilting workshop. So very, traditional, very simple, just a sort of 4-patch, how to use a rotary cutter, how to sew an accurate 1/4 inch seam, that sort of stuff. So I did that, and that was great. But my heart, at that point, I kind of left traditional quilting behind. So I was very much an improviser at that point. And then as I began making more quilts, and then I found social media, people would reach out and say, how do you make this? And what's the pattern? And, where's the instructions for this? And of course, there aren't any. It's all from here.
Like,
yeah, there aren't any. I'm sorry. So there was definitely a desire from people to kind of show them how I'd done things. So that's where I kind of began thinking, well, maybe there is like a book in this. So I approached several publishers, and I had sort of like a proposal of what it would be like. And at the beginning, it was very much vegetable focused. I still hadn't got over my love of vegetables at that point. It was just going to be like a showcase of vegetables. Here's a leek, here's a pumpkin, here's a here's a beetroot or whatever. And obviously that's very niche. Not everybody is going to be as obsessed with cutting open vegetables and replicating them in fabric as I am.
Right.
Why? I have no idea. But so we kind of broadened the spectrum a little bit and just made it more of a sort of general piecing book with then sort of projects that I've made at the end to kind of show you how you can put those newfound skills into practice and be inspired by something. So never in a million years would I imagine that I would be writing a book. You start something as a creative hobby, it kind of takes on a life of its own. You think, okay, I'm quite good at this, people want to know more. But the idea of a book was just like, no. If I ever imagined myself writing a book, it was always going to be like a non-fiction, a children's book or something like that, non-quilting related at all. So yeah, that opportunity was amazing. And as I said, that would have been sort of written 2017, 18. I made 12 quilts for the book, all the samples, did everything myself. And yeah, the Inspiring Improv came out in 2019. And the response was just great. People were very, congratulatory and very sort of nice and kind about the book. And especially going into COVID 2020, that year that we all like to forget, people wanted something to do. So they kind of, lots of people since have said, I found your book in lockdown and it kind of helped me and broadened my horizons in terms of quilting. So to have the opportunity to do that and share my love of improv with people through a book is always is something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, that's incredible. And yeah, like I don't think many people set out with the idea that they're going to write a book or that they're going to put their own process or the thing that they like or love into book format to share with other people. And I think teaching a class is one thing, but to sit down and write through that process is completely different. So,
and there was also a bit of like imposter syndrome, I think, as well, because, what are we, 2017, I began quilting in 2012, so only 5 years. So I was definitely questioning myself, am I the right person to write this book? Am I qualified to write this book? Again, that's sort of imposter syndrome. I can't do it sort of thing. But if a publisher has faith in you and, people are asking you for the stuff, then it's worth trying, definitely. It was definitely an experience, but one that I enjoyed thoroughly.
Yeah. I think it's funny too, those imposter thoughts that get kind of trapped in our heads, and we think, oh, I can't do this. Oh, I haven't done it long enough, or I haven't, had as much experience as, these other people, but they all started at some other point too, at some point where they were probably feeling imposter syndrome and just worked their way up into what they are today. And these people we look up to. So it's like, if you don't just start somewhere, at least if you have, the foundations and you have your process down and you know what you're doing and you have a way to communicate that, then I feel like those voices, like, I think they come from outside of us. I think if we really tap into our own selves and like who we are as people, like there's like really good positive thoughts in there. And it's like outside voices that then come in and say, actually, nobody likes you. And you're like, wait, what?
Yeah. Why?
Where did that come from? I was just feeling really good about myself. So it's hard to battle that and figure out, to navigate around it, because the voices are still there. It's just,
Definitely.
what do you do with it? And do you let that tear you down, or do you move past it and say, actually, I'm going to do it anyway? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's so awesome that, you got the feedback first for people to ask you, like, how do you do this? How do you do this? For you to then be able to say, well, maybe if I just write it down, I can just say, okay, get my book,
Yeah. It's quite difficult to, you write a traditional quilting book. There's a lot of maths, you have a specific way of doing it. It all turns out right as long as you follow this. But obviously with improv, you strip all of that back. So you're kind of just giving suggestions. So it was very difficult at first to kind of, because if I'm in my studio and I'm making something, I just, grab a bit of fabric, hack a bit off, hold it up, trim a bit off, pin it in place on the wall or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a very organic sort of changing process.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously a book doesn't work like that. You can't just say, grab a bit of fabric. You have to give some guidance, however vague that guidance. So it was just about sort of recording what I was doing and kind of then saying, cut a rough 3-inch-ish, kind of, there was lots of ish and approximately in the instructions, just so that people can sort of have a starting point. But it was very much the process, or the idea of the book is that I wanted to give people the skills first and then have them kind of run with it and kind of be inspired and not make carbon copies or try to make carbon copies of the quilts that were in the book, because those were just sort of starting points. This is how you can use a freehand curve to look like a fish, but what I really want you to do is go out and find something to use a freehand curve in for yourself, because that's putting your newfound skills to the test. So the idea of an improv book kind of might be, well, is that, does it work? Is it possible to have an improvised quilting book as an instructional text? But for me, it was very much about just suggestions of, this is how you can do it, but you can also do this, or how about you try this, or this. So it was just about kind of giving permission, I guess, to people to play and to be creative and to not follow rules in their creative practice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes we need that, right? It's like holding somebody's hand when you're jumping into the ocean off of a cliff, it's like not, in a fun way. Like you might want to do it and you might have everything you need to start. You just need that extra little like encouragement to do the thing, or, so I think that can help. And improv, you're like, well, I just took this piece and I sewed it to this piece and then I hacked it off here. And then but I think, giving permission to, you can grab that little 3-inch scrap and you can add it to this bit and it's going to start to look like this. And you can take it from there. It's a little bit of scaffolding to encourage further climbing and for that person to keep going on their own. So I love that. And I think, again, because people were asking you and you had done all the trial and error, you had done all the kind of fiddly bits of working through some of the problem solving so that you could offer those suggestions, you could offer those bits of advice because you had done it all before. for yourself for several years,
Yeah.
So I think that experience holds value for other people, especially when you're teaching them. They need your expertise to learn how and to give them confidence that they can do it too. So that's
Definitely.
good. And
It's a
I love the
process as
title.
well.
Oh yeah.
It's people have to be kind to themselves. You can't expect, like anything, you open up the book, you see a quilt as an inspiration that's made in an improv way. You're not going to replicate that at your first attempt at it. You have to have a couple of strikes of the bat to kind of get into the flow of working in a completely different way. So it's just about being kind to yourself, giving yourself the permission, but also not expecting it to kind of come overnight, because you have to. It's a whole new skill. You're starting from the beginning again, and somewhat with improv, everything you've learned up until that point, you're kind of throwing out the window, right? Because it's like 1/4 of an inch seam, you must sew 1/4 of an inch seam. You never iron your fabric; you always press it. Whereas I'm like, oh yeah, just iron it and don't worry about the 1/4 inch seam and just rip your fabric. So it's you're kind of going back to step one. So it's a process for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that the title is perfect because you're inspiring people to do improv. You're not saying, here's step one, here's step two, here's this, here's the exact size piece I use. And this is it. You're inspiring people to use improv and
Exactly
to take their own path on it. And
yeah.
I think that can be a scary step for some people. I think we like to tend to like the predictability of following a pattern and following someone else's instructions, and then we have someone else to blame when it doesn't work out right. And
Yeah.
but I also think the beauty of improv is that there is no right or wrong. There is no like, well, I didn't follow the directions, so it came out wrong. It's like, what directions?
Yeah, exactly.
It's whatever's popping out of your brain. And I think too, when you're involved in that kind of hands-on, in the moment problem solving process, you might start something, walk away from it because it's frustrating, or, maybe you just needed to be done for the day, whatever. Your brain is still going to be spinning its wheels on that problem because it's a problem to be solved. And that's what we're hardwired to do, is to solve problems. And so I think that's also a beautiful part of it is again, just igniting those parts of your brain that maybe you wouldn't otherwise if you were just strictly following someone else's instructions, and pushes you to think through things and problem solve, which I think is, as an educator, like that is a really big proponent of what I was teaching my little 3rd graders, my little 8 and 9-year-olds. We're really focusing on problem solving and thinking through how to approach something to get to a solution. And I think it's underrated. I think a lot of people shy away from it because it feels really hard, but the more practice you give yourself and the more time and space you give yourself to try those kinds of things, it starts to come more naturally and more easily. And so just like, with improv, it's hard at first because you're trying to just figure out what the heck, how do I even make that shape with no guidance or no direction? You start to see things and start to figure out ways like, oh, I know that, if I use this skill and this skill and this skill and I marry them together, then I can work on this, I can make that shape. I can make that, color gradient, whatever it is. Like, we can start to pull what we already have to support this new adventurous new endeavor. So I love that. How fun.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, obviously I do. It keeps popping in my head and then I ask a different question because I'm like, have all these other questions. But anyway, have you found, and did you find as you were learning quilting and coming into improv, did your like work in photography and your education in photography, did that bring you any kind of insight, or did it help you see things in a new way to help you work through, designing improv, or just even with, choosing colors or anything like that? Did you feel like it was informing you in any way?
Yeah, definitely. So, we talked about how it might have been a disappointment that I didn't pursue photography, or wasteful of that money and that time spent. But I can definitely see the benefits of having that background in photography. Because the only difference really in the way I look at it is the medium, right? So
Mhm.
not making photographs, we're using fabric instead. But the idea of tone, composition, line, shape, all of that is still relevant and really important. So I definitely think in photography, you talk about having like a photographer's eye, you can kind of break up compositions and things. And I think when it comes to arranging quilts, patchwork pieces into a composition, or the idea of shadow and highlight and tone and contrast, all of those terms which are equally at home in quilt making, particularly improvised quilt making or art quilt making, and photography. It's great to have the foundation. So I no longer see it as a sort of a waste of time. There was a moment where that was the case very early on. But now, no, I love that I have that to kind of pull from and guide. And I think now it's intuitive. I don't think, oh, look, I'm using photography skills. It's kind of there and it just happens. And I kind of like put things up and I go, okay, this is a little bit too high contrast or whatever. Because again, we're talking about terms that are equally at home in both camps. So definitely having that background has been a great help now that I've found myself in this more spontaneous, organic way of working, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because photography, I mean, even though like you're saying, you have to find your composition and what your eye is looking for in a photograph, but it is a little more improv in the sense that you're just kind of going out and letting your eye see what it sees and then deciding what your photograph is going to be.
Yeah.
And so I feel like improv is probably similar in that way where you're just kind of like, okay, I have a general sense for what I'm looking for as far as what I want to make, and then pulling colors and different, textures of fabric and kind of figuring out where things are going to go together is probably similar, I would guess. I don't know. I'm not a photographer.
No, you definitely, you've hit the nail on the head there because you think about it. So, the traditional rules of photography, the rule of thirds and not to have your horizon straight away, bang in the middle and don't put anything central. But if you think about like an event or something where there are lots of photographers, so be it a film premiere or maybe it's a war documentary photographer or whatever it might be, that action is the same action whether you're photographer A, B, C, or D. It's how you compose that shot. And some people will purposefully kind of break the rules of photography in order to get the best shot, and that is exactly kind of what we're doing with improv. So we've learned the fundamentals of quilting and seams and piecing fabric and that sort of stuff. But now we're like, well, what happens if I kind of don't cut this straight, or if I add a little piece here? In exactly the same way that a photographer might be thinking, well, what happens if I kind of blur this a little bit, or if I overexpose this, or I put, I don't know, harsh backlight on something? These are creative choices that they're making in the same way that I'm making now that I'm working in a different medium. So there is definitely a crossover there, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so fun. And just because so many of us have different backgrounds, we didn't just start in quilting.
Yeah.
So to see how those different lives, it's like a different life of, being a photographer versus being a quilter, or me being a
Yeah.
teacher versus being a quilter and a podcaster. Like, I mean, the talking and being the one, in front of the camera is kind of teaching related. But anyway, just seeing how those things kind of inform your now self and your now, what you're doing now and what you're doing to move forward and how that comes together. So that's really cool. Yeah. And I just love hearing about it because it's just so interesting. And I think because of my own experience and because of how I had that crisis of identity and I had that shift of feeling like, how am I going to go from this? I'm a master's level teacher and have my craft honed. Like, I'm going to just drop it all and go make quilts for a living. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that felt crazy. But it does inform the things I do. It does inform how I approach things and how I talk to people and how I learn and how I get interested in things. And so I just love to hear from other people too, because I'm like, I know you weren't always a quilter. Where is it? Like, I want to open this treasure box and see what's inside. Because, there's your work is unique and it speaks to who you are, and it has its own voice. And so just learning where that voice comes from is just so fun. So
Yeah.
So you teach with Crafty Monkies, and we love Rachel.
We love Rachel, yeah.
So how did
she's paid me £10, so I have to say that.
she's paying us to be nice.
We're joking, Rachel. We're joking.
Just kidding. We love you. So yeah, how did she grab onto you?
Yeah, so she obviously, I feel like I'm mentioning COVID again. I try not to mention COVID, but it is relevant to the story. So, as you know, Rachel kind of set up a business where the idea was to have in-person quilting retreats, and they were going to be very glamorous and very exciting. And of course, COVID put a stop to all that. Quite soon after she came up with the idea for the business, so she had to very quickly transition to online things, teaching. Right. I think a quilter friend of hers and mine, Sarah Payne, suggested that, as long as you've got a device, people can join and we can teach them through the medium of Zoom or the internet. So Rachel kind of branched out into that around about the same time that I was doing that. So 2020 for me, obviously just on the back of the new book, right. Was very busy with teaching engagements, both, domestic and international, all cancelled, obviously, for reasons we know. So I then transitioned to quilting online, and one of my first, or teaching online rather, and one of my first gigs was with Rachel at Crafty Monkies. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first. She approached me and, kind of told me a little bit about her and what she was planning on doing. And I kind of thought I could see both sides. I could see the positives of kind of opening up the world to people and kind of getting people, out of this together. But also I thought, is it going to be really impersonal? I'd only ever taught in person up to that point. So, is there going to be that interaction? Can't look over their shoulder and go, oh, that's amazing, well done, all that sort of stuff. So it was with a little bit of hesitancy that I agreed to do it. And I just went with something very simple for my first class. I went with triangles, which you can see behind me. And I remember Rachel saying, we've sold out of all the 40 places or whatever it was. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, we've sold out. The class is sold out. So I was like, oh my, it's amazing. So I did it, and it was 3 hours, never done anything like that before. Completely different kind of to in-person quilting or teaching. And we built both a professional relationship, but obviously a very nice friendship as well. The more and more we sort of collaborated together. So that would have 2020. So we're now on 5 years of me teaching online through Crafty Monkies. And I just love it because you obviously have regulars who come for my classes, but then, you have new people that Rachel brings, a new audience. Maybe they found her through another teacher that she might have. And then they kind of say, oh, well, what's this class? What's this improv class? So it brings lots of different people to it and just opens up the world. I have people in my class from, I think we've had every continent except for Antarctica or something like that. We've definitely had, North America, Australia, India, and I think Europe and Africa. So whatever's left, we haven't had. So if you're from that continent and you want to join a class, please do.
Jump in.
Come on. But it's brilliant. People are getting up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. to join the class, and they're learning skills that they're then taking with them. And then they tag me on Instagram and say, just want to say I've made this after I took your whatever it might be class. And it's just amazing to see that, a screen and a device like a camera or a phone, iPad, whatever it might be, can kind of just help to impart knowledge to somebody all the way on the other side of the world and have them feel so good about it, And I can see it in their face. You see it in in-person workshops as well. There's always one or two people who are, as we talked about, come from that traditional background. So there's a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of hesitation, not quite sure if they can do it. And I see that in the Zoom window as well. Rachel always says, who's new to Crafty Monkies, who's new to improv, and the hands go up. And you're kind of thinking, right, okay, so I'll kind of, be gentle with them. And by the end, they're holding up stuff and they're loving it. And the feedback, it just makes me want to do it more because they're so pleased with themselves. because they've achieved this thing that which they thought was unachievable. And I just love that, things like Crafty Monkies and Zoom workshops enable me as an educator to kind of just give that to people. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. And yeah, like because we talked about that when she was on my show, with like her step into that and how she started it and then everything shut down and the quick pivot she had to make, and having Sarah there to encourage her to try it. Like, let's put it on live, let's get on Zoom, let's put it on live. Let's make sure people can get onto it, and helping her work through that. Cause I think, yeah, people, it was almost like, something that I think some people in the quilt world could like hold over other people's heads. Like it allowed them to continue being kind of I don't know, like have a superior, like kind of affect around people, because they're like, well, I traveled to go do this thing and I took a class from this person and it was exclusive. And it's like, well, guess what? It's not like that anymore. And anybody can take any class they want at any time. It's like, it broke down those barriers, which I think is so, so important, because again, that accessibility and that willingness, if you're willing to try things, but you don't have access to maybe information, or, even maybe your library doesn't have a book on that certain thing that you want to learn. And maybe there aren't local teachers that you have, but that's why we have YouTube. That's why we have Zoom classes. That's why we have, organizations like Crafty Monkies that are bringing amazing teachers to you in an accessible way. It just opens up the world of quilting and breaks down those like barriers and stops people from gatekeeping techniques and information about quilting that should just be free and available. I mean, not free all the time, because it's like, if it's your specific thing that you've designed and it's unique to you, then yeah, you should be paid for your work. Your work is valuable and it has value. And so it's, things are costly. And so anyway, that's a different soapbox, but just that ability to say, oh, I can sign up for this. I can get on Zoom. I can wake up, 3 a.m. to take this class if it's really that important to you. Some of us, maybe that wouldn't work so well, but that's okay.
It takes a certain type of person, definitely. There's definitely been some, early morning people in my classes, and I'm like, good on you. That's, you must have really wanted to take this class to kind of get up that. And it's just great to see.
Right. Well, and just the determination, if you really want something, you'll do what it takes. And if waking up a couple hours earlier is what it takes, and go to bed a couple hours, it's like, there's just super easy, again, problem solving. There are solutions for everything. You just have to be willing to look for them. And I think that's what improv is. That's what, it takes to be a human who continues to grow and learn. And that's just, it's so fun. And I have yet to take a Crafty Monkies course. So we'll see. It's so funny. I like have all these ambitions and I'm like, I'm going to take this class. I want to do this and I want to do this. But then I'm like, oh, I literally am so busy in my business. It's like, as much as I want to do all these things, I'm like, okay, but I also have to make money. So
I'm the same. I see like Rachel has new teachers all the time, and I'm like, oh, it's quite fancy. That looks like an interesting technique, and it's maybe something that I've never even thought of, or it might be completely removed from quilting. It might be, I don't know, dyeing or so or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'd really like to do that. And I kind of look at my diary and I'm like teaching that day, and I'm like, oh, damn, it's having time, isn't it? It's so busy that you can't kind of allow for your own creative exploration, but it is important. So we have to kind of be kind to ourselves. And if we want to take a break, it's very important I do have to believe it's important to just take a break, because you're only bettering yourself. Then there's nothing negative really can come out of taking a break. So what, you're not earning money on that particular day because you're taking a break. Who cares? You're resting, you're kind of feeding your own creativity, you're learning something new. So it's important. But yeah, I totally get what you mean about, too many things, all of the things and not enough time.
Yeah. Yeah. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep, promoting it and encouraging people to take classes and stretching yourself beyond your comfort zone. And I think too, it's a different story when, you're in it as a craft, as a hobby, and not as a business. And you have a different perspective where it's like, oh, I'm bored with what I'm doing, so I'm just going to go take another class. And that's great. I love that because that's what keeps us in business, right? um,
Yeah.
um, so then, yeah, then flipping the tables and then being the one to go take classes and to continue. But I think also when you are on our side of things, I'm not a teacher per se in the quilting space, but making quilts for other people, long arming for other people, like I'm always having to learn more. I'm always having to stretch my skills in service of my clients and my
Yeah.
customers. And so I think for you as a teacher, as even though you're teaching your own subject kind of, you still have to get better at it. You still have to, because I'm
Yeah.
sure, problems arise or situations come up with when you're teaching that you're like, oh, I've never encountered that. And so
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
problem solving on the spot. And
Yeah.
it's like in the moment intervention. And again, coming from my education background, those were like the most important moments, those quote unquote teachable moments
Yeah.
that we'd look for as teachers. Would be circling the room and kind of not mindlessly wandering because you're listening for certain things, you're kind of checking out what your kids are doing, and I'm sure it's the same if you're in person teaching, kind of watching what other people are doing and finding if you can anticipate, like, oh, she looks like she's having trouble, or like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like he might not have it quite yet, but I'm going to give him space to figure it out. And
Yeah.
then kind of you're tuning into what's going on. And so being able to catch those things in the moment before somebody hits their frustration point, before they walk out of the room squawking because they're mad, it's like,
Yeah.
let's nip it in the bud and let's figure this out together right now. And so
And
those go.
there's definitely lots of that particularly in the in-person teaching. So, you're kind of, as you say, canvassing the room, you're looking around, checking in on people, and they'll kind of call you over and there's a huff and a puff and they're,
Yeah.
I've done it wrong, I've made a mistake. And I always say, there are no mistakes in improv. And you kind of look at it and, obviously myself and the experience, I know exactly what they've done wrong.
Right.
And I kind of explain it to them, or I kind of say, do you know why that has happened? Let me show you why that's happened. It's not wrong. There's always a fix around or whatever. We can make it work. But if you
Right.
wanted it to be as I showed you, it's because you've done this, this, and this. And then they're like, oh my goodness, now I know. And you
Right.
guarantee they will never do that again because they've made the mistake and they've
Right.
worked their way through it. So those, as you say, teachable moments are great for both students, but also for me, because every day's a school day, right? I'm still
Right.
learning in the quilts that I make and the classes that I teach and the talks that I give and the interactions that I have with other quilters. I don't know everything I need to know about quilting. I'm still learning stuff. Every new quilt that I make, there's something different. There's a challenge. It doesn't always work out right. There's dead ends and twists and forks in that journey to the end product. So it's great to have those teachable moments, both for your students, but also for yourself as a creator.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes a huge difference, I think, in when you're looking for it. Cause I think sometimes there are educators in the classroom and, for quilting and in traditional education, but just that kind of sit back and go, well, I did my part. I taught the lesson and now I'm going to sit back and let everybody kind of work. And they don't engage with the learning and they don't engage with the process. And it makes a difference. I think it changes the dynamic. It changes how the students, the learners feel about themselves in that space. And every once in a while, I think in those environments, you kind of almost the students all band together and try to help each other out because they know they're not going to get help from the teacher. So it's like, but why would you want to be that teacher? Like rest on
Yeah,
your laurels and just like everybody else should just figure it out. It's like, no, we're taking your class because you're supposed to teach us how to do this thing.
exactly. Yeah, it kind of
So
defeats the whole point of being there, doesn't it? Really.
yeah, yeah. So I think sometimes when you get really good at something, people who know you, or if you're well known in your local quilting spaces, you can kind of get asked to do these things, and maybe it's begrudgingly because you don't really want to, but you do it because you're like, well, I need money or whatever the case is, but it's not coming from a place of like, yeah, I really want to share this. Like, I know I'm good at this thing and I know I've worked really hard on this and I want to share it, versus I'm really good at this and everybody else should just have to figure it out themselves. It's like there's definitely a different like mindset that comes with all that. And so
Yeah.
I I do think that specifically in the Crafty Monkey space, just knowing what I know of Rachel and how things kind of go for the classes, just hearing from other people about them, like she works really hard to make sure she's got educators in her classes that want to be there, that want to
Yeah.
teach, that want to engage with the students and be a source of inspiration and a source of, you know,
Yeah. And you
support.
see that the same faces, obviously she has a stable of teachers, and she's very good at bringing in new teachers, new skills, new mediums, that sort of stuff. But then you have regular, instructors and educators like myself. I said 5 years now I've been doing this.
Yeah.
I always say to Rachel, I'll teach a few classes for you a year because I just enjoy it. So I want to be in that space. I want to be in that environment. And similarly, she has other that are regular instructors. They always have one or two classes listed. So she definitely has the skill, if you like, to sort of curate and nurture this teaching body, which is a passionate teaching body. They want to be there. They get joy from teaching others and sharing their skills and seeing those skills grow in that individual and have them become something that both the teacher and the individual who's made the thing are really, really proud of. So she's very good at doing that, bringing the right people together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And good, it's good for you. And I'm just so happy for you that, you got in early and got in with her and can continue sharing your love of improv and your skills with people, because I think, like I said, your work is unique and it's beautiful and it stands out. And, you can tell you have a learned creative eye, because I think there's a difference between just liking colors that go together and knowing how colors go together and knowing how composition works and all that. So it definitely makes a difference. And then and I was going to ask this too, again, about photography. So do you do all your, like, did you do all your own photography for your book?
No, so some of it I did. So there was a few photographs in the first book that kind of I took as kind of like process shots and just sort of like things. But I was really fortunate, actually. So the publisher, Lucky Spool, is an American-based publisher. So
Mhm.
one of the projects in the book, in fact, the cover project is inspired by the redwoods in Yosemite. And I went there with a friend who we met whilst we were living in Paris. She was from California. And long story short, her sister was getting married and she invited us to go to California with her to kind of do a little road trip. And we went to Yosemite. And it was just awe-inspiring to see these, sequoia trees. So I was inspired by those. And then the opportunity arose for that particular quilt to actually be photographed in Yosemite, which was amazing. So the picture in the book that you see of the fall quilt is in that national park. So I had to send all of the quilts to America. The photography of the finished products was done there, and then there were a few bits that I kind of did, which made their way into the book. But I kind of think if I had to make the quilts, write the book, and do like all of the photography and have that photography be really nice, I think I would have kind of just had a meltdown. So it was not kind of like give that arm of it, that whole creative book making process, that bit I could give to somebody else and have them, do a really good job, which they did. And it was, I love the photography, and that's something that people often say, oh, I love the book because of the photography. So if I was offered to do it, I probably would have declined. Just if for nothing else, my own sanity, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious because I think sometimes letting go control of something that you know how to do, can be
Yes.
hard,
Yeah.
especially, and especially if you have a certain aesthetic, a certain eye for how you want things to look. But again, I think knowing yourself enough to know, like, that's not the important part of this. I can let somebody else take the photographs. Like, I need to focus on these other things. I think
Yeah.
that delegation too is good, of knowing yourself and knowing what's important to you. And you're like, yeah, I've got the skills, but do I have the brain capacity? Absolutely not.
Yeah, and that's it. It's not only about skill, is it? It's also about, can I put this much on my plate? Can I cope with all of this whilst I'm trying
Right.
to make the product be as good as it possibly can be?
Yeah.
But there was
Yeah.
also a point where quilty friends were offering to, as you know, obviously writing the book, you have to make all of the quilts in advance so that they can be photographed and everything in the book design. So it's all a whole process. And I had quilty friends, offer to hand stitch the binding down. And I was like, no, I want to do it all myself. Even like the smallest slip stitch on the back of the binding. I was like, no, I need to just have it all be me. All of these quilts have to be me. So there was definitely moments where I did take in that control and not relinquish it. But yeah, other moments where I was happy to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like just an important point I think as a business person, writing a book and promoting a book and getting it published, that's a business venture, right? So knowing your skills and where they're at and what you want to do and what you don't want to do. I think it's, again, I mean, my husband and I have had several businesses over the years and we still have a couple that we run together, but and he helps me with my quilting business and stuff, but it's that like, what do I love doing? What do I not like doing? And how can I outsource those things to other people so that I can focus on doing the part of the business that I love? And so, that's exactly what you did. You're like, I'm fine if somebody else takes the pictures because I really need to work on this other stuff. So, and that humility to like let things go, because it's like, if you try to grasp onto everything, nothing's going to get done well.
Exactly. There's going to have to be compromise, isn't there?
Right.
And it's going to be to the detriment of one aspect of the whole process. So whilst this might be good because you know that you can do it and you don't trust anybody else to do it, therefore you take control of that part, then what are you sacrificing to do that? So it's definitely a balancing act. And if people have the skill and they're willing to help, and you know that they can do a good job, which then in turn allows you to focus on you doing a good job, then it's striking at that balance, definitely.
Yeah. And with, friends offering, oh, I can stitch the binding. You're like, no, but the whole point of the book is my process, the quilts I'm making, it's like, if you help, then how can I then say I made this quilt? It's
exactly.
And I think in other circumstances, there's obviously nothing wrong with friends helping you finish a quilt. I've had happened, when I first learned, I pieced my quilt top, but I didn't know how to quilt it. I didn't know how to, do the backing and the binding. So my friends helped me finish. One friend long armed it, the other friend did the binding, and then I had a complete quilt. And then, as I learned to quilt, I learned the process of everything. But yeah, when you're like, no, the whole point of this book is
it's mine,
my quilts, my work. You can't just be given those tasks out to be done by others, because then what's the point? Yeah. So that's funny. But I think, the discernment and the humility and self-knowledge it takes to make those decisions can be really hard. And it takes a lot of digging into who you are and what you know about yourself to be able to say, yeah, you know what? This is not something I want to do, and I'm going to give it to somebody else. And my business or this book process will be better for it because I'll be able to do the things that are important that I do. Like, I can't just outsource my designs or my quilt, my long arming to someone else, because then it's not my work, right? It's not, it's not my design. It's not from me. So it's hard. It's hard when your business relies mostly on your own physical labor. Like, what do you delegate? What do you outsource?
Yeah. What can you kind of trim off? Yeah.
So it can be a tricky spot, and also like Lucky Spool would not be the publishing company that they are without an incredible team of photographers and people to support their authors. And
that's they were kind of top of my list when I was kind of sending out things, and I was just really pleased that they were on board and they decided to go with it, because the books that they produced, well, up until that point and still do, the books that I'd had experience of before I written mine, they were beautiful things. So I really was excited to kind of get them on board, and just pleased that they said yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Well, so tell me, what do you have coming up? What's going to be happening for you in 2025?
So 2025 was supposed to be my year off, in air quotes. It's going to kind of just slow down a little bit. So kind of not take a complete break, but just say say no to a few more things just to kind of, as we said, allow yourself to explore your own creativity, recharge, because you don't know what comes out of that exploration. It could be your next big class. It could be your next technique that you're really excited about. It could be your next quilt that kind of comes from that. So I wanted to take a little bit of a break, but that never happened. So 2025 is pretty chock-a-block because, as I said, I love to teach. So when people kind of approach me and say, can you come here? Can you come there? Particularly if it's like abroad or international, that's such a good opportunity. I'm quite hesitant to say no. So I have lots and lots of teaching, both in the UK and in abroad this year. And then just sort of trying to fit in amongst that a little bit of creative time for myself. I have a few ideas of quilts that I want to try and make. So just sort of laying the bare bones of those, getting the processes down, doing the sort of prototypes bits, to see if the ideas in my head translate. But yeah, just a busy year, both online and in-person teaching here, there, and everywhere, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And it's funny how those things you're like, I'm going to just take a break, but then it's like all these opportunities pop up and you're like, how can I say no?
You can't say no. It's too hard to say no. And this is finite. You have to make the saying, make hay while the sun shines. And I totally, I'm not oblivious to the fact that eventually there will be a new quilter or a new whatever, there'll be something else. And that's just the natural order of things, isn't it? The new thing comes along. So I'm very aware of the fact that, I will not be in demand, years down the line. So whilst people want me and, I enjoy doing it, I'm going to take the opportunities because they are great opportunities. Last year, I went to America with Rachel as part of her Crafty Monkies retreat. It's amazing. We got to go and we hung out in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, and Lancaster County. It was just fabulous. And we went with Sarah Hibbert, another UK quilter, and we just had a great time. So these opportunities, they are quite difficult to say no to. If people are willing to stick you on a plane and fly you to amazing places. So I'm definitely going to say yes to that.
Right. And I think too, if you're still enjoying it, then there's no real reason to say no unless it's harming you somehow. And I think if the yes came with an eye roll or I guess I'll do this, like I don't really want to, but the ego yes, I think is what I kind of tend to call that, where it's like, well, but if I don't go, then I'm going to be irrelevant all of a sudden. It's like, but if you're having fun and it feels exciting and encouraging and inspiring, then I say, make hay while the sun shines. Keep getting on that plane, keep showing up for people that want you. Because we all kind of fade at some point, right? Like what we've left in the world is still there, but it's like, again, like you said, the next kind of new big thing shows up and then people gravitate towards that, and that's fine. We all have our moments to shine, and I think make the best of what those moments are. So that's exciting, and how fun for you that you get to jet set around and teach the thing you love, and it's so exciting. How fun. Well, as we wrap up, I just want to ask you if you have a tip or a piece of advice for our listeners. It can be quilting related, it can just be life related, but is there something that's just like you always fall back on?
So the advice, it is quilting related, and it's a piece of advice that I give, a lot. And we've talked about sort of how I found improv, and it might not be as easy for some other people, right? So they might be very traditional. They might be stuck in their ways, for want of a better phrase. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you are open to exploring a new way of creating, a new way of quilt making and patchwork, then my top tip is to not focus on the end product. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going on a journey that is not going to be from A to B, because that's your traditional quilting. That's your step-by-step instructions. That's your hand holding. But this journey is going to have twists, it's going to have turns, and it's definitely going to have dead ends where you need to backtrack and kind of revisit what you're doing. And that can be scary. It's like being out in the wilderness without a map. You will be lost at points. So I always advise people to focus on that journey rather than the destination. And that sounds really cliche, but what I mean by that in the context of improv quilting is if you're making something that has no fixed size, you're just expressing your creativity through triangle quilts, for example, or color or whatever it might be, then don't worry about how all of those individual elements are going to come together at the end. Just have fun in the now, in the making of those things. Because the great thing with improv is we can take away and we can add. So we can add to them in the number that we need. We can take away by actually cutting into what we've sewn to make it smaller or fit in better. So if you focus on those small moments within the journey of where you're going, rather than thinking, right, this is going to be 80 inches square and this block that I'm making now is going to be in the top right corner, you're just going to be stilted again. You're going to be stuck. So focusing just on that moment that you're in that creative process will drive you forward and eventually lead you to that final destination. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, where do I even begin with improv quilting? I don't have the book, I don't have whatever, I don't go to classes. It starts with just 2 pieces of fabric that you just sew together, perhaps with a slightly wonky seam. Perhaps those pieces of fabric are irregular size scraps that you found, or you've just hacked them with scissors. You haven't used your perfect 4.5-inch square ruler to do that. And when you've sewn those pieces together, that then is your kindling. It's your creative spark then that you add to that to make it grow into something amazing. So just be very micro focused on that journey. Just focus on the small bits of fabric that you're sewing together, and the end destination will take care of itself.
Yeah. No, I love that. And that's a great life advice to carry as well. It's if you're always focused on what's next, like you're not focusing on what's happening right now. You're not focused on the people and the environment you're in and the situation you're in to be able to appreciate the present moment. And I think we can get so stuck in that, like, okay, but I should be doing this, but I should be doing this. It's like, no, slow down, come back here. We're right here. Take this present moment and let's figure out what this is. And I love that because I think you're right. Like if you're focused on the size of the quilt, the end product and what it's supposed to look like, you will stifle yourself. So I appreciate that because I think it's an important perspective and it's an important mindset to have as well as not just in quilting, but in life in general. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today and for chatting with me and letting me get to know you better.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been awesome.
Yeah, so fun. Well, we will keep an eye on what you've got going on this year, and people can check out your book, Inspiring Improv. Is it available pretty much everywhere or?
Yeah, so wherever you get books. So whether you want to go, big online retailers or small independent quilt shops, I've seen it stocked in lots of different places. So yeah, Inspiring Improv. And then there's also Use and Ornament, which is the second book as well, kind of like a follow-on, more techniques, a little bit more history about improv. I kind of term it half quilt book, half history book. But yeah, wherever you buy books, both available, published by Lucky Spool.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I didn't even realize you had a second book. So that was my.
I just dropped it in there.
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you so much. And okay, so we'll look for both of your books and your Crafty Monkies classes. And I'm sure there is lots more to come from you. So thank you again, and we'll chat later.
Thank you so much. Thank you.